All right, we are going to pattern and fit a standard hip foundation. And this is typically a women's dress sloper that has a range of fit elements that it can use. Darts, a combination of darts or seams like princess seams, arm side princess, French princess, whatever you might want. And to do this, we are going to bring in an avatar. And I am using the new library, so I'm going to click on this icon in the top right of your interface. And the new library looks like this. To get your avatar, obviously you're going to go into your avatar folder. And then I'm going to go into my female avatar folder. Just double click the avatar that you want, one of these AVT files. And the size that I'm going to apply to this, I'm not going to do this as default size. I'm going to choose a size 8 from the ASTM Missy Curvy. And that's because it's most similar to the dress forms that we use in class. And I can double click on that size and it will automatically apply it to the avatar if you have one avatar in your workspace. Just similarly, I can right click on it and add to workspace, that type of thing, any of these files, just like the old library. Speaking of the old library, if you want to get back to the old version of the library, you can click on this back arrow in the bottom left. Before we X out of this library, I'm going to add a fabric from the fabric folder. And I want a muslin, so I'll scroll down to woven muslin. 22 by 22 is a good medium weight. I can double click that to populate it in my object browser or click and drag it into the object browser just as well. Again, right click, add to workspace. A lot of different ways you can achieve the same thing in this program. So now I'm going to X out of this. Anytime you want to get back into your library, click on this icon up here. Okay, we have our woven muslin in our object browser. I know that I'm going to start creating patterns with this fabric instead of the default fabric because this little check mark to the right or to the left of your line item. Okay, so that's good. We can close up this panel and make some space in our workspace. Now, ideally you have an image of a digital pattern that's already been created to real-world specs, meaning it has all the same POMs as a real-world sloper. And I'm going to bring in an image onto a pattern piece. And to do that, I'm going to create a pattern first using the polygon rectangle tool. And I can click and drag just like all of the Adobe programs. Remember that this program was modeled after the Adobe program and the user friendliness of it. So those that are familiar with those programs are going to have an easy time picking up the functionality of this program. So clicking and dragging, obviously, but just the same, I can click in the background to get a precision box to type in the specific dimensions that I want. So for this method and this specific sloper, 30 inches wide by 50 inches high will work. I just need one pattern, so I'm going to hit OK. If you're not working in the correct unit of measure, you can change this by going up to your settings up here in the application menu. You might not be able to see it on this recording, but up at the very top, your application menu, you have a settings menu. Go to user settings, and then in user interface, right at the very top, you see unit system inch. If it's in millimeters, how it starts, the program starts with millimeter as a default, then just change it over to whatever you want to work in. Your hotkeys are very important. If you are not using these, you need to get used to them right off the bat because it really expedites your workflow. The two that you need to learn first are these two top tools in your 2D toolbar: transform pattern and edit pattern. The transform pattern is A, and that's just like your black arrow selection tool in Illustrator. It selects the entire pattern piece. You can select multiple pieces by clicking and dragging your marquee selection box. You also have the capability of scaling your pieces either proportionally with these corner widgets or aproportionally. So I'll Command Z that to undo all that. And just the same, you can rotate using this little handle at the top here. So A is very important. Z is the edit pattern tool, and that allows you to go in and select specific anchor points, boop, or specific segments. Very important. One thing I do use a lot though when I'm making edits to patterns is the edit pattern tool, the standard one obviously, but you see how this has the little triangle in the bottom right hand corner of this tool. That means there are family tools nested with this tool. So if I long hold on it, I can see all of these related pattern editing tools. But the one that I use the most, other than the regular edit, the standard edit tool, is the edit curvature tool, which you can quickly toggle back and forth between the standard edit and the edit curvature by holding your Alt or Option key. And when I do that, I'm holding the Alt or Option key and I hover over a segment, you'll see the icon next to your cursor changes to this little S curve, which means when I pull or drag this line, click and drag this line on either direction, you'll get your handles, just like Bezier handles in Illustrator, and you can use those handles to then manipulate it in a more nuanced way. So that's a very handy alternative tool to know, holding Alt or Option while you're in the Z edit pattern tool. So start to use those hotkeys. It's very, very useful. Now I'm going to place the image of our pattern in the actual pattern. To do that, one of the ways you can do that is by using the graphic tool. The graphic tool is this little t-shirt right here. And really quick, let me just get to my 2D window. I just want to see my 2D window because that's going to be the majority of the workflow at the beginning here. And to do that, down in the bottom right of your workspace, you see the icons right here. Clicking 2D will bring up just my 2D window. And there we are. Now back to the graphic tool. This little t-shirt in your 2D toolbar. When you select this, a navigation window will pop up and you can choose any file that you want on your computer. So you have to remember where you saved this image, obviously, or wherever you have your image, whatever image you do use. And I can double click this or select and choose open, and it will not populate into your space until you set it into a pattern. Now we do need to scale this to be bigger, but I don't know exactly how big I need to scale this until I do another step in a second. So I'm just going to hit OK for now. And once you place a graphic into your pattern, the tool will automatically change to the transform graphic tool right here. And you know it's the edit version of the main graphic tool because it has this little cursor in the top left-hand side of the icon. Different than this triangle in the bottom right. That means you have nested tools. The cursor in the top left means it's an edit tool. When I have this transform graphic tool and you click on the graphic itself, you'll get this widget for controlling the size and the rotation of it and position of it. You can click and drag it anywhere in that pattern now. So when I have this selected, it's important to know that the triangles on this circular widget here are going to give you your proportional scaling. So clicking and dragging will give you that proportional scale. I like to use the reference between the dashed lines of the original widget and the new scaled size of that pattern. So the relation of those two is a really easy way to see how much you're scaling this, because you don't have a preview of the size until you actually let go of your cursor and it applies the size scale. So proportional scaling, obviously you want to keep things proportional when you're making things bigger or smaller in this case. So the circles, the little circles on the top and bottom, left and right, that's going to give you your aproportional scaling, which we do not want. So Command Z, Command Z. And just the same, you can rotate this image as well by hovering in between the triangle and the circle and clicking and dragging to rotate. Now, before I let go, if I hold Shift, it will click into the angles that are exact. This is your constrain key in this program, Shift. So you have your 90, your 45, your 180 degrees. I do not want this to be askew, so I'm going to Command Z back to straight up and down. Okay, we do need to scale this in a second, but first I need to scale it to a specific measurement. So how am I going to do that? Well, I need to get a measurement from the avatar. So let me bring back both windows real quick. And I'll hit A for my transform pattern tool, so I can just get this out of the way. And a lot of different ways you can figure out measurements of your avatar. One of the ways is to go into your vertical toggle menu. You have a vertical toggle menu right next to your toolbar in your 3D window and also in your 2D window. These vertical toggle menus are everything that has to do with display, how things appear in these windows. So if I go down to the avatar display icon and click Show Avatar Measures, boop, there we go. Now when you think about this, what's the logical way that you can get the size that you need to scale this pattern to? Well, there are certain things that we know about slopers, just standard hip foundation slopers, like a women's shoulder at this size is typically 4 3/4 inches to 5 inches. That could work, but that's a pretty small measurement right there. The bigger the measurement that you use to scale this off of, the more accurate it's going to be. So I would like to either do the hip measurement here, because that's going to be one of the biggest measurements, or the bust measurement would also work. But the hip measurement is going to be relatively equal from front to back, potentially. It's not always going to be equal, and most often it's slightly unequal. But I'm going to go with this one because it could be bigger than the bust. Likely is in a lot of cases, but it might give me also a closer equal division between front and back. So now I can click on this low hip measurement, and here I have 39.25. I don't worry about that 3. I don't go all the way to the thousandths. It's not going to be that precise that we need to be with this. I usually round everything to the hundredths. You do need to, well, it's a good idea to keep in your head what an 1/8 of an inch translates to in decimal, and that's 0.125. So keeping the intervals of eighths in your head is very helpful. So like 5/8 is 0.63, or 3/8 is 0.38, things like that. So how to do this? We're working with a half panel of a front and a half panel of a back, right? The full circumference measurement of the hip is 39.25. We need to half that first off, which would be nearly 20. So we're going to do 19, and let me think a second. That would be 5/8. 19.63. Let me just make sure. Yeah, 19.63. Technically, it divides into 19.625. I think rounding up is always smarter. Start with bigger so we can take away material rather than trying to add it on. So half of that hip circumference is 19.63. And we're going to quarter that hip circumference now. So what is half of 19.63? 9.82. 9.82. Let's do. Okay. It's helpful to have a piece of paper to take notes like this when you're doing patterning in a more conventional way, like from a book, and you've got a lot of math. Keep some paper and pencil near, because you need to write things down like this. All right, now we can scale this. So we have to have some device that we can scale it to. We can do this a few ways. I can put a line in there using my internal line tool. So just using this tool right here, right under your polygon tool. Remember, these are internal lines, actionable lines. You know they're internal lines when they are red here. Boop. So I can use an internal line tool, and to get a precise length with your internal line, you would do a single click, make sure it's perfectly on the x-axis, you're not at an angle. You know you're on the x-axis if you have your smart guides turned on, and it highlights pink like this. So you can right click instead of left clicking, and you'll get your precision dialog box again, and you can type in 9.82. Boom, hit OK. And to finish it, you just return to that last anchor point and click on it again. So internal line tool works here, or I can use a POM tool, which is this tool right here. It's a little ruler with a segment above it. And I can do the same thing with this. Keep it right on the x-axis, or hold shift if you need help keeping on the x-axis to constrain your angle, and then right click. Type in 9.82, hit OK, and return to that last point and click on it again to finalize it. All right, we are here. We're ready to scale this. It does not matter really where you put this. We're just going to scale one of these patterns to it, and then we can reposition this wherever we need it to be. Once it's scaled, it can go anywhere on the pattern. Okay, if you do need to, for some reason, change the position, you just go to the Edit POM tool right here, right? And you drag it, boop. It doesn't like to be dragged by the middle of the segment. It wants to be dragged by the end point, okay? Now we can go back to our transform graphic tool so we can scale the image that we have. And you could do this in a much more precise way if you created the file without any background, or let's say you did this individually, not both front and back together, and you also took the measurements of just the front and just the back type of thing. Now, I'm going to scale this to the back here, and we're going to aim for this biggest part of the hip. Once you get to this biggest part of the hip, it doesn't really matter where it gets applied to below it, because it doesn't get any bigger or smaller. It just drops straight down from there. But I wouldn't want to do it right here where it's still gradually getting bigger. I'm going to do it about here-ish. And this is all you're getting as close as you can to the proper scaling with this method, and then you make your adjustments to your patterns when you see how it simulates on the avatar. You do your fit adjustments. So let's scale this then. I'm going to use the proportional scaling on the widget, which is the triangle, and I'm going to scale it up little by little until it gets closer to this back panel to fit the hip width to this 9.82. I know this is the back panel because the neckline is more shallow than the front. I have a front bust dart here, so there are things telling me that this is the back other than the CB center back note right here. So we need to scale it a little bit more. I'm going to reposition it so it's lining up about to the edge. Anytime you need to have more precise control over your positioning or anything really, the scaling that we do, you need to zoom in for more control, more precise control. So I'm going to scale down just a little bit, and remember to see just how much scaling you're doing, look to the widget and the relation between the original dashed line and the new dashed line. So I can see that this would be just a tiny bit of a downscale right here. And I'll reposition to line this dot up with this. We just need a tiny bit more scaling downward. And I might have done it too much, just a little bit too much. So a bit of a back and forth with this method, but it shouldn't take too long. Okay, that looks good to me. We have our dots right on the edge of this. So we're about right there that we need to be. Now we are scaled. We don't need this POM anymore. So I get the edit POM tool. I can click on that and I can hit delete, or I can right click on it, say delete, any of those options. And let me go back to my transform graphic tool to center this in my pattern piece just a little bit. Another good tip for maneuvering around your workspace is the zoom. Panning is great, right? You always need to know how to pan, which with the settings that I have, the default settings, Magic Mouse settings, panning is your left mouse button while you're holding Alt or Option. So click and drag, and that is panning. But zoom is one of your other three navigations, and you can sort of use zoom as panning when you're trying to work quickly. So zooming out a bit and then repositioning your cursor to the area you want to zoom into is very helpful and quick. So I'm doing something over here in this corner, but I need to go to the other catty corner. So I zoom out and hover over that corner, zoom in. Go to the bust dart, boop. Very helpful. Okay. All right. So let's, now that we are centered on our pattern piece with our graphic using the transform graphic tool, be careful not to accidentally scale it while you're repositioning it. Maybe you are using the widget or being too close to the widget while you are repositioning. And we are going to draw our pattern now. So one thing I like to do, it might be a little bit overkill, but it's a good thing to know about nonetheless, is locking your pattern. So nothing changes, nothing has the potential of changing on this pattern. And to do that, you're going to right click on the pattern itself and choose lock. And now you cannot move it at all. When you want to undo this, you just right click in the background and say unlock all pattern outlines, and you're good. So right click, lock, boop. Great. We have a couple of different ways we can get a pattern from this. I could go around and trace this shape off. Both ways are tracing the shape of the pattern, right? One way uses internal line tool, the internal line tool, but afterwards you would have to then convert it to a pattern. So if you traced off some shape and then you had something like this, you would then still have to convert it to a pattern. So you would have to right click on it and clone as pattern, boop, place it into your workspace, and there it is. One extra step, not a big deal, but you could also just use your pattern tool. So I can go to my straight up polygon tool right here. I want the standard one that allows you to freeform draw. This is hotkey H. I remember this because H and G, that's the two main ones for patterning. H is the patterning. To get an actual pattern, H, you have a pattern. H, have a pattern. And then G is the internal line tool. I don't have a trick for remembering that. I just remember the one that isn't have a pattern is internal line. So G is internal line, H is patterning for have a pattern. Now you can start tracing off. Hopefully you've gotten used to this tool by now, and just the same as Illustrator, you can do this in a number of ways. If you like to create the curves as you go, you can do that by clicking and dragging and creating your curves, then returning back to that previous anchor point, clicking on it to reset the segment to a straight segment. Or what I like to do, which is really fast, is straight segments all around and then go back in to create your curves. One reason that I like to do this, other than it being a very quick method, is because now when I bring in curves after the fact, there will be no half straight, half curved segments, meaning Bezier handles only coming off of one anchor point. I have Bezier handles coming off both sides of the curved segment, and thus more control over the curve. So I'll go around really quickly and drop points at every point that I need them. You want to minimize the amount of points that you're using, so don't just put in extra points when you don't need them. I'll put a point right here at the notch of the front armhole, at the underarm. I'll come down here and do one at the leg, outer leg of the dart, the center leg, and the other outer leg. Natural waist. We're going to have to true this. This red dashed line is not quite on the natural waist here, so natural waist. Let's say this is the hip line right here. Let's go around 7 inches. You can see the number that's changing as I move my cursor. That's telling me it's about 7 inches from my previous anchor point, and 7 inches to 8 inches from the natural waist is about the low hip area. So let's say ish, and then I'll go right down to the bottom, drop this. I want this to be straight, so when my line turns pink, that's telling me it's nice and straight, dropping right down from that previous anchor point. Now this is a weird dart right here. It's a combination of a fisheye dart and a seam at the bottom of it. So we're going to have to make that dart in a minute. What I'm going to do is drop, again, an anchor point at the outer edge, one in the middle. You can just guesstimate the center for now, and one on the other side of it. Boop. And we can finish off here. Again, make sure you are looking for those pink lines to ensure that you are perfectly on the x-axis or parallel with center front or perpendicular with it for the hem. And I'll start this back. We'll do the same thing for this dart, dropping anchor points at the outer legs and the center leg. Remember, zoom in as close as you need to be able to get right on the line. So if I'm zoomed out like this and I can't quite get it to pop into the area that I want, zoom in closer. It gives you more precision. I'm going to try to align with this other point here with the front point. So that pink smart guide is very useful with this. I'm going to drop that hip line point right there. And I'll finish off right here. Okay. Now we need to go to our Edit Pattern tool. That's hotkey Z. And remember, holding Alt or Option with this tool will give you your Edit Curvature tool. So we're obviously going to need that for the method that we used for the straight segments, turning those into curved segments. So holding Alt or Option, pull that curve in, pull this curve in. I'm going to go around and put all my curves in that I need, and then I'm going to go in and tighten up everything. Okay. Okay, those are all the curves that we need. Now I'm going to create our darts. So I'll bring this center point in right here. Zoom in close enough to see where that actually is, and it will give me access to that. I'll see if I'm actually on the line here. You need to check if your center back neckline is squared off, just like in regular real-world pattern making. You need to true your patterns. So this needs to be a 90-degree angle for it to make a smooth 180 transition over to the other side when we unfold it. So to do that, you have some options. You can use this Bezier handle and adjust it until you see 90 degrees right there. Or you can right-click, which this is a really handy tool now. You can right-click on this anchor point and say perpendicular pattern corner. So for this, it automatically assumed I wanted to do this on the center back line, that vertical line. I don't want to do that. So I need to change the direction of this perpendicular corner that's applying. So in the window that popped up, change the direction from start to end. So now it's on our neckline, that's what we want. And the length, I can do, let's do a 1/2 inch. And this is good, let's hit OK. And that looks fine to me. And just check that you're actually on all of the corners and all of the lines. Let's do the same truing for center front neckline right here. Right click on them, add perpendicular pattern corner. We're going to change the direction again, and this time I'm going to do a 0.25 so it doesn't have too much of a aggressive effect on the rest of the curve. And that's fine for now. The last thing is this dart at the bottom that is part fisheye and part seam. So to make this, I'm going to bring that anchor point up that we initially created, and we're going to need to employ another tool that we haven't talked about yet in this video, and that's the Add Point Split Line tool, which is going to give us the capability of adding an anchor point anywhere we want on a segment. So we need 4 more anchor points here. The hotkey for this is X. You can also find it underneath your Edit Pattern tool all the way at the bottom here, hotkey X. So I have X. I'm going to place an anchor point here and here and here and here. Then I'll go back to Z, my regular edit tool, and bring these out. Ideally, these are symmetric to each other from the center point. And then we have 3 diamond darts, 1 in the front panel, 2 in the back panel, to put fully encompassed internal line darts in here. We need the dart tool underneath the internal line tool. So long hold on the internal line tool, go down to the dart tool right here. And same thing with this, you can right click for, you can start your drag, right click, and get a, oh, apparently not. Okay. So with this tool, we are going to click and drag a dart, and we can just get close here and then adjust it in a moment. I'm going to do the same for this, and notice how I'm lining this up. I'm not starting in the center right here. I'm starting at the top point and the outermost edge right there of the dart. Then when I click and drag it, it should line up if it's perfectly symmetrical for a dart. We'll get close enough to it. This diamond dart is much higher on the top side than in the bottom side, so we're definitely going to have to adjust it. Just start it out, try to get close, and then we'll adjust from there. So hotkey A to get my transform pattern tool to get any initial positioning correct, and then so I'm going to put my center legs. I actually want these to be right at the same level. I know that this is the dashed line of my waist, my natural waist, but the smallest part of the actual pattern is where I have this point, right? So I'm going to align these points, which are the biggest intake of my dart. That should be at the smallest part of your waist. It's going to take away the most material. So I want these points to be at the same height or level as this point, my natural waist point. So using my transform pattern tool, I need to deselect for a second because my entire pattern is selected. I need to click on the background and then just select this dart. And if smart guides don't pop up, meaning the pink lines that tell you you're in line with this, you can use this dashed blue line that's showing up right here. So it's giving me the center points of my dart, and I can eyeball the position of it right here. Same with this. Oh, Command Z to undo that. And notice how when I let go of that dart after repositioning it, my entire pattern is selected. So I need to deselect again to select just this. Oh, right. This is a seam that goes all the way down. So that is actually part of the pattern. How we need to change these, the position of these 2 points, is just with our edit pattern tool, Z. And I'm going to select just those points and bring them up together at the same time with those. Oh, it's not letting me keep centered. Let's try doing this. Okay, there we go. Let's Command Z and see if we can zoom in a little bit. Okay, that looks good to me. Okay, I'm going to reposition these in the same way we did this dart. I want my center dart points to be in line with the smallest part of my waist. So the intake of your dart should align with this. So I'm going to click and drag this with the transform pattern tool. I'm trying to stay right on the same Y axis so it doesn't shift in position. And I want to get this about down to there. Okay, back to Z, my edit tool. I'll click off of everything and then drag this back up to the point where it needs to be for this top heavy dart. All right, I'm thinking we're looking pretty good to now simulate. Sew up and simulate. So our transform pattern tool, I can select both of these, bring them out into my space. I'm going to unlock my pattern outlines, and I'm going to bring this guy up out of the way and get him out of the way in my 3D window as well. And I'm also going to freeze it because I don't want it falling all over the place when we simulate this dress. Let's turn off avatar measurements. And now, we only have a half of a dress at this point. We need both sides of both front and back. We're going to keep the front a full piece. So to do that, we need to unfold with Symmetry. So I grab the Edit Pattern tool, and this is important. You're using the same or the correct tool to do this. If you use the Transform Pattern tool and select the entire thing and right-click on it, you're not going to see this option for unfolding. Why? Because the program doesn't understand what you want to unfold. Do you want to unfold from the shoulder? Do you want to unfold from this side seam? No, we need to tell it the segment to unfold it from. So the Z Edit Pattern tool, select just the center front line, right click on it, and unfold Symmetric Editing with Sewing. What this is going to do is apply symmetric editing and sewing to this pattern, meaning when we sew one shoulder, the program is going to automatically sew the other shoulder if we're also working with a symmetric duplicate back, that is. Our other option was just unfold, which does not have symmetric editing and sewing. It's just a full pattern, which is good sometimes, but almost all the time, until I'm deviating from a symmetric pattern, I need an asymmetric pattern. Almost all the time I use the unfold with symmetric sewing and editing. So I'll Command Z that and unfold with symmetric editing. Notice the difference between the two. You have this dashed line in the middle, and you have one side that highlights blue, one side highlights yellow, indicating it's a symmetric pattern. And the back, we're going to treat a little bit differently. We are going to create a symmetric duplicate of it, not unfold it. So we're going to leave that center back as an actual seam that gets sewn. To get a symmetric duplicate of your pattern, the hotkey or key command for this is Command D. So that's something that you will likely need a lot, and it's a good thing to get in your memory right off the bat. So Command D will give you that, or right click on your pattern and say, if I undo that, because I already did it, it doesn't give you the same option, right click on it and say Symmetric Pattern with Sewing. It's right under this section here. If you can see it, it's very hard to read because of the tone of the partitioned section, clone pattern with linked editing right here. I want symmetric pattern with sewing. Boop, same thing. And if you noticed, you could see the key command right next to it, Command D. Easy to remember because D for duplicate. All right, here are our patterns. Always arrange your patterns that in a way that makes sense in your workspace. So I have my center front in relation to my avatar. And we can sew this up relatively quickly. I like to use the free sewing tool for almost everything. It's just easy. And the shoulder, my where is left, if I start my sewing relation, I'll go from HPS to outer shoulder. So I have a single segment here that needs to get sewn to a double segment. Make sure you're not including this dart right here. So a click and a click to start the sewing relation. Hold shift and click, 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 click. What that little blue dot just told me was that my shoulder is not the same length. I would need to do some additional truing for my patterns to be correct here, which we can do after the fact too. Same with this side seam. Notice I didn't do the other shoulder. Remember what we were just talking about? Symmetric duplicates and unfolding with symmetric editing and sewing. The other shoulder was done already for me. You don't need to do this. You don't want to do this again because it creates problems for you. So side seam, the out seam, I'm going to keep this separate from the bottom area of this side seam. So if I make changes, it will also maintain those sewing relations. The darts going in the same direction from outer leg to vanishing point, outer leg to vanishing point. I know that's correct because my tick mark's on the same side, same end. Think about this, how they are sewn together and how the program needs to understand how to sew it. Let's sew this dart just in the same way. So we have all the way at the bottom, click, go up to the vanishing point, all the way at the bottom, click, all the way up to the vanishing point, click. We do need this shoulder dart on the back. Any darts that were made with the internal dart tool, those were already sewn up together, so that's pretty handy. And then lastly, I'm going to sew up my center back seam. Boop and boop. All right, let's go over to the 3D window now with our avatar because we need to arrange our pattern pieces on the avatar. A lot of times I'll arrange my patterns first, but it doesn't matter too much. If all the seams are getting in your way visually, you can turn the visibility off, and that is right. Wait, no. Show, where are my threads? Yeah. Show threads in your vertical toggle menu. So garment display, show threads, turn on and off. Boop. Let's get this arranged on our avatar. So Shift F is going to give me arrangement points. You can also do that through avatar display right here. And I'm going to move these out of the way a little bit. Let's place my front first. That looks about right. And then this one is my wearer's left. Okay. If for some reason, when you arrange these onto your avatar using the arrangement points, and you're like, this is like extra curly. It's curling too much into the body of the avatar. You can offset the curvature by selecting the pattern piece, going into your property editor, and then all the way down here, you see offset. The bigger the number, the bigger the curvature of the pattern. So this is fine where it was. I don't really need to change that. Maybe I'll raise it just a little bit. And even if it's colliding with the avatar just a little bit like this, that's minimal enough to where it's not going to create any huge issue when you simulate. Remember, the thing with simulation is that you want to give this the best shot at simulating correctly around the body. Don't make it hard on your computer. If you try and simulate when garments are all the way here in your space, it's just going to jumble up into a mess when it goes over here. So arrange your patterns first. We've already applied our sewing, and hit spacebar for simulation, or your simulation button up here in the top left corner of your workspace. And pretty decent fit. You can zhuzh it a little bit. The upper area is a little bit baggy, but remember, we scaled that pattern to the hip, so that should fit pretty well. We haven't checked any of our fit maps, but this is just the first stage of this method of pattern making. All right, to fit this, now, most commonly people use a grid system of horizontal and vertical balance lines to try and target the treble area of a garment. And we're going to put HBLs in our patterns, horizontal balance lines. Here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to turn simulation off, so spacebar. Remember to look for your simulation being on. You don't want to keep that on unnecessarily. Close up my property editor. All my panels are closed that I don't need to be open currently. And we're going to put in a bust line, HBL. So right at the bust, we're going to have one from here to here. We're going to have one at natural waist, and we're going to have one at the hip line. Ideally, you've done all of your truing first at this stage. So, and that means you've checked your sewing relations, the lengths of your patterns. So I've selected this segment, 16.45 versus 16.45. That's good. This is 6.67. This one is 7.10. So I would want to fix that for sure. Let's see what this is. 8.19 versus, I'm holding shift to select both of these, 8 inches flat. So we're about 0.2 inches off there. The methods you use to fit this or true your patterns, that's its own process in itself, because you have to sort of figure out a system, a sequential process, so you're not going back to undo work you've already done. Start from the front usually and move to the side, move to the back. So everything is changing in a direction, in a sequence. You're not having to jump back and forth to things. Shoulder seam is 5.17 versus 501. So let's just change this guy to 501. To change any segment length here, you right click on the segment, choose change length, and we want 5.01. You might even want to change the entire thing, both of them, to just 5 inches to make things simple. And the direction, again, is dependent on where you want this change to be applied. You could do at the start or the end or centered. both. Let's assume that I'm going to do it on both sides, even though we would want to match this up and see how the shape of this armhole related to this armhole. All those standard truing steps. I can do that manually like this, just by flipping this and lining it up like we normally do with patterns to see how it looks together. So how this looks together like this. And that's manually doing it, how you can do it just from real world knowledge. But there's also a this matchup function. Let's say we wanted to do this. I think we can do it with this separated as well. With your Edit Pattern tool, you need to select the two segments that you want to match up together. You right click on one of them and say Match Up. You say to start. Nope, I needed to choose to end. Right click, Match Up to end. And that's an automated way to get your patterns aligned where they're going to sew together so you can see how those shapes are. And that looks fine. So you would have to go through this whole process. It can sometimes take quite a bit of time. So work on that if you need to get this back to where it was, straight up and down. You can manually rotate it or right click and rotate, set along grain direction. Boop. And let's put in our HBLs. All right. From our bust line, let's do this one first. We're going to use our Edit Pattern tool, and these are going to just be internal lines. I'm going to keep them as internal lines rather than do baselines. You can always switch them over to that later. But first, let's do internal lines. So I want a line to come out from this vanishing point of the dart, because that's my bust level right there. I'm going to right click on him and say Add Perpendicular Internal Line. To which axis do I want to add this internal line? The y-axis is up and down, so we want a horizontal line. So we do perpendicular to the y-axis. Hit OK. So there's our bust line. Great. We can also put one in for our hip line. So there's a few different ways you can do this. We can do it the same way we just did from our bust vanishing point by right click, add perpendicular line, y-axis, hit OK. Great. And then we could also do this. So right click, select your bottom edge of your hem, and if you know the amount, the distance you need to move up from the bottom, then you can right click and say Offset as Internal Line. I want one internal line, one number of offsets, and let's say it's 17 inches up from here. Good thing is you get this little preview, right? Let's maybe do 15 inches. No, 16 inches. That's pretty close. Hit OK. And that gives you your HBL also. So here's the thing with that. You can select as many edges as you want. You can select boop, boop, and boop also, as many as you want, and do it all at once. Right click, offset as internal line, and do that. 16 inches, okay. And there's our HBL, our hip line. I'll delete this first one. Either one would suffice as long as it's telling you where things are level and where things are dipping, right? Or angling upward for that matter. So we have our hip HBL, we have our bust HBL. We need to do the same for our natural waist. So right click, let's do that one at a time. Right click, add perpendicular internal line, y-axis, and okay. Do that same thing for this guy, right click, y-axis, okay. And I'll do that over here as well. Okay. Last one that we want to put in here is the SBL, shoulder blade line. And this is typically around 4 inches below the center back neckline intersection. So 4 inches below here. And how we're going to get that one in here is by adding an anchor point 4 inches below this anchor point. So I'll hit X on my keyboard to get my add point split line, and I'll right click while I'm hovering over this center back line. The shorter of the two lines is always going to be the yellow one, so this was the shorter of this one because this anchor point is breaking it into 2 lines, right? Shorter part, longer part. Type in 4, hit OK. And now we can do our same thing that we've been doing with the Edit Pattern tool, hotkey Z, right click on that anchor point, add perpendicular line to y-axis. Hit OK. Great. All right. Now if I look over here in the 3D window, we have some good information with these HBLs. So you would start fitting from here. This would have been fixed if we had trued our measurements beforehand, but I'm assuming you know how to do that. You know what tools are at your disposal, so apply those real-world truing skills that you have, and then you could make small adjustments from here. So potentially we might want to make the side seam come in a little bit, right? You would bring this in, but you're also going to want to be careful not to deviate from the length of your side seam because they should match from front to back, right? And keep your dart legs the same or as similar as possible. And anytime you make a change to one side, it will make that change to the other side of your pattern because you did that symmetric unfold, right? You make a change over here, it's going to make it over on this side. Super helpful. Okay, and you don't want to make too many changes or too many drastic changes without simulating in between. So we're well on our way. We're a little bit closer now in the underarm area. Maybe I want to take more space out of the back rather than the front. Before I let you go, there are 2 things that will really help with this. One, turning on your transparent garment rendering style. So how the textile looks. We have a where's translucent? Right here. So you can see how closely it fits to the body, how much space you really do have. The back is gaping pretty badly away. So maybe you want to bring this in a little bit. Maybe you want to make this dart a little bit bigger. Maybe you want to just take it off the sides. Then the other thing I want to share is the other style of garment rendering, which is random color. And what this is ultra useful for is telling the pitch or determining the pitch of your outseams, or really just your seam lines, where they lay, because it applies a random color to each pattern piece, really distinguishing the different pieces. So I can see that my shoulder seam is pretty well balanced, not too far back or too far forward. I can see that my side seam is pretty straight up and down. Maybe this one up here needs a little bit of help. But it's also a very useful tool to assess your fit and how your pattern is draping. All right, well, have fun fitting your dress, and I will see you later.